Now we're going to install the handlebars onto the steering stem. So you'll want to go into your hardware kit, find this bolt, nut that goes with it, and then you should have a special sort of spacer. It's kind of U-shaped on one side and flat on the other. So take this washer or spacer, slide it over the bolt so that the flat side is towards the head of the bolt. And then you should see on your handlebars that the front side has a hole larger than the rear side. So that's where this is going to line up. And you need to get your handlebars and the steering stem, the holes in both of them lined up with each other. Then you slide your bolt through the front here. Then you'll need to check it out in the rear. You may have to pick up on it, turn the wheel a little bit, and then slide that bolt through and make sure the spacer or washer is sitting in that hole in the front of the handlebars. Once you've got the bolt through on the other side, you'll want to apply a little Loctite to the threads here. Then you can install the nut that goes with it. And that's going to be 14mm hex head on one side and 13mm hex on the other. Make sure you get that good and tight. Once that's tightened down, I'll usually put a hand on the front tire so I can hold a little pressure and try to turn the handlebars left and right and just make sure there's no play that way. You also want to check the steering stem now. So grab your handlebars and try to just kind of shake it around. And if there's any movement in there, you're going to need to tighten this bottom piece here, this bottom nut down, and then tighten this top nut against it to secure it. And you should be able to move the steering wheel left and right freely, but you shouldn't have any play otherwise. As long as it's correct, then you'll probably need a couple of adjustable wrenches and just make sure these two nuts are tightened against each other. You're not trying to change their position, but just make sure they're tightened against each other. The next thing you're going to want to do is just take a walk around the scooter and look for anything obviously out of place. Make a note of it if you find it, or if it's something you can take care of real quick, go ahead and do it now. You'll be going over the wiring, bolts, and all that stuff later, but just take a quick look because sometimes there's some really obvious things wrong. For example, down here, there's just a plastic bag attached to the scooter with nothing in it for no reason. I've got two wires open here. Got a wire tie just laying on the scooter. I see down here on the center stand, they didn't bother to bend the pin all the way, so I'm just going to go ahead and bend that around all the way now. One thing you may find when you're walking around the frame are rusty areas on the frame like you can see here. If you do find that, should be able to just wire brush the rust off of there, maybe use some sandpaper and then paint over it, just mask all around it so you don't get overspray on anything, and paint over that. Next, you want to go all the way around the scooter, check all your hardware, nuts and bolts, make sure they're tight. You may want to actually take the bolts, nuts, whatever off one at a time, apply some Loctite and then reinstall them. The engine you'll want to leave alone for right now because a lot of fasteners on the engine require a certain amount of torque. You really don't want to over torque those. Motor mount bolts here, you don't actually have to take the bolts all the way out. Just remove the nuts again one at a time, apply some Loctite, and then install the nuts again. You got one here and one here. Your wheel, the axle nut, you're going to need an impact, or you're going to have to be able to hold the wheel and have a pretty large ratchet. You want to make sure that's secure, maybe apply some Loctite to that. You can check the bolts holding on your heat shield and the end cap for your muffler. The side stand here. Again, just give it a good look over. Leave the engine alone, but otherwise, make sure all the fasteners are secure. Apply Loctite. You're probably going to come across some nuts and bolts where the threads are a bit messed up while you're going over all of them. So it's a good idea to have a rethreading or a chase set around, or even a tap and die set around, and then you can just go over the threads of the nuts or bolts and clean them up so you won't have problems with them in the future. Most common sizes you're going to need when you do this are M6 by 1.0 and M8 by 1.25 millimeter thread pitches. If you haven't done this before, it's a fairly simple process. You just need to find the chase, tap, die, whatever it is that fits over what you're doing, what you're working with. Get it started on there, which sometimes can be a little bit of trouble if the threads are really messed up. Once you get it started, you'll usually find the tight spot, kind of wiggle it back and forth. Keep doing that, wiggling it back and forth every now and then. Sometimes they're tight enough that you'll actually need to use a wrench or socket And if they're that tight, you'll want to back them off, blow all the particles out of there, the debris out of there, and then continue on there. And you just keep doing this until your nut or bolt, whatever it is clean and goes together easily.